Hello, my name is Casey Williams, Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Spring Hill, Tennessee, and welcome to Brilliant Strokes. Brilliant Strokes is an intergenerational art program provided by the Arts Build Communities Grant through the Tennessee Arts Commission. And if you would like to be a part of this program, you can register online through the city website, www.springhilltn.org, or through the Parks and Recreation's Facebook page. All of our instructors are local artists, and we're so grateful to them for donating their time and their talents to be part of this unique program. Have fun!
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Susan, and you are in the Brilliant Strokes class. This week we're looking at watercolor, but we're going into watercolor journaling. And even though this is my favorite project to work on, it's the hardest to teach. And the reason why is watercolor journaling is something you do for yourself. It's very personal. And we're going to go over different ways you can do it. So you may want to put some thought into it before you start working on your journal, but it is by far the most fun of all the projects. So let's get started. I want to show you first of all my watercolor bag. And so I have this beautiful bag, and we're going to open it up and see what goes inside. The first thing is my watercolor journal. And I actually started this as a nature journal, illustrated nature journaling. But I found out that every time I go on vacation, it's to the beach, so we're out in nature. It's on a mountain, so we're out in nature. So it's not just nature, it's also travel. So this ended up being a travel journal, a nature journal. I've even illustrated different recipes with it, but I want to show you everything I've done. I also illustrated the front of it, put in a pocket, and added a passport that says adventure awaits. And then every time I go to some botanical garden or historic home, I have them stamp my passport. And if they don't have a stamp, then I'll purchase a sticker or maybe my admission sticker and put it in the passport. So I keep that right here. And I started it using pen because this is not watercolor paper. So I bought magic markers in all these different colors plus black pens and started doing my design work. And the first place I went was Owl's Head, Maine. And Owl's Head is this beautiful little rural spot in Maine right on the ocean. And I start by putting the date. I put where I am. I'll explain the weather, sunny and warm, chilly and breezy, snowflakes, whatever it is. And I go across the top, and then I go down this side, across the bottom, and back up the other side. So we're making a frame on each page, talking about the date, where we are, what the weather is, and then what I can see from that vantage point. And not only what I can see, but what I feel, why I'm there, anything you might want to capture in words in your journal, because this needs to be very personalized to you. Now, instead of doing one big picture, I chose to use my markers, and you can use any kind of medium you want. Colored pencils, oil paint, acrylic paint, gouache, watercolor, pens and ink, anything you want to use, whatever you like to use. And at this point, I was using the markers, and I did the Owl's Head Lighthouse and some harbor seals and a crab and a loon and some shells. And then I wrote little things by each one, maybe a quote that evoked, from my memory when I saw this scene, possibly a quote of someone I met while I was there, something they said, or just to illustrate more of what it is. For example, the harbor seals are laying on rocks. The rocks are gray, the seals are gray. I'm not even sure you can tell it's a harbor seal, so I just wrote harbor seal. So there's no confusion as to what that is. And then this is one of my favorites. We stayed in the Owl's Head post office. It's an Airbnb, and the post office is right here, but the rest of the building is an old barn that was on an island off the coast of Maine that was brought to the mainland and turned into a 3-story Airbnb. And so I illustrated that, and then going to Acadia National Park one day, we stopped at a roadside lobster stand, and this is an illustrated part of my lunch, actually. And I know this seems really, really silly, but I took a picture of it and put it on Facebook, and 2 years later, the owner of the Airbnb somehow came across it. He was Googling Owl's Head Post Office to see if people had any photos or any reviews, and he saw the painting I had done. And he offered to buy the entire journal from me. He said I encapsulated everything he and his wife love about Owl's Head. And although this is personal and I would never sell it, I did scan this and email it to him and gave him permission to have it printed. So if you stay at the Owl's Head Post Office, it's quite possible you're gonna see a framed print of this page of my journal. So it's amazing how these little silly illustrations can really mean something to you and mean something to someone else. This was in Acadia National Park. Out in my garden, this was just from the front porch swing. There were bees and flowers and frogs and ladybugs and butterflies, and on and on and on. Azaleas and bees and inchworms. And notice I only did this on one side because the marker that I was using was coming through the paper, so I never did anything on this side. It was always on the right hand side of the page. And this was my peonies. This was in Lanark Village and Carabel, Florida. And where I said I usually do little vignettes all over the page, that day I was just inspired to do one scene. I was sitting at a picnic table in front of the Carabel library, and the water and the docks were right across the road, and just painted this beautiful scene of a boat that was there, and just wrote what I was doing and why. And it's so nice to go back and relive these trips through the pictures and through the words. It's amazing what you forget when you travel, but when you take the time to paint it, take the time to talk about it, just those few words, that little picture just takes you right back into that moment. It's one of the reasons why I really love watercolor journaling. This is a bottle brush. These are things that I'm not even sure you can tell that that's a boat that had gotten marooned up here on this part of the beach. I'm not sure you can tell that's a bottle brush, but when you write on there what it is, again, my mind just goes straight back to that trip and how much fun it was. It's another boat, more boats, birds. And then I got to where, this was fun. This was at Fort Lauderdale at Bonnet House. It's a historic home in Fort Lauderdale, and this is the entrance into the house. Just amazing. Loved it. This is at Ripavilla in Spring Hill. More Ripavilla. More Ripavilla. Amish country down in Etheridge. And this is the first day that I decided to try watercolor in this journal. And I was at a friend's house in Santa Fe. Robin Barber, beautiful house, overlooks this beautiful vista, and she had flowers growing. Again, I'm still doing the date and the day and where I am and the temperature and what I see. So I'm still doing the frame around the page, but instead of using marker, this time I decided to use watercolor. And because this is not watercolor paper and it's not pre-stretched, it's getting kind of wonky, kind of wavy. But honestly, I love that. It gives it kind of a vintage patina. And from then on, I only do watercolor in this book. More Ripavilla. This was out at the dog park when we had an event out there. And then this is a recipe, and I know that seems really silly, but I just thought it was beautiful. This is a little child's Little Chef stove that's in my kitchen, and some gingham that I had, a gingham runner, and just decided to write my recipe for fried green tomatoes here. And I love the way that turned out. In fact, I may even photograph this, have it put in prints, and frame it for my kitchen. This is one I did of a peach pie recipe. And I think that, no, there's more. This was at a friend's lake house at Rock Island. Oh, this is fun. This is when I started doing Adventure Awaits travel classes. So it's a one-day class, and when I hold the class, we meet at a historic home or botanical garden or somewhere where we spend the day together. We tour, we take reference photos, we do lunch together, and then we spend the whole afternoon painting. And that's where I decided to get the passports for Adventure Awaits, and that's the name of the class. And this particular piece in my travel journal, you'll notice I did a double page spread. So we've got the Athenaeum up here. That's one of the houses we went to. This is the Belmead Mansion. We've got a magnolia blossom, the passports, the fountain pens, the watercolor brushes, my watercolor kit. And this was at the Hermitage, and you can tell that I had some time to paint, so I did my own painting. I came home with my reference photos and filled in. I did the writing where I wanted to remember certain things from the day. And then all of a sudden you're gonna notice that these classes were popular, they started getting bigger. So my travel journals don't have quite as many paintings in them anymore because I'm helping students do their own. But this was at the Belmead Mansion, and this is a bee box that's there on the property. Now I've already put the date, and I put my frame around the double page spread, and I've still got my reference photos. So on a cold, rainy day when there's nothing else I'd want to do, I can pull out my photos, my watercolors, relive that day, and fill in these 2 pages. This was at the Isle of Palms in South Carolina, and I've gotten everything on here and never got to the watercolor painting. So there's no right way or wrong way to do this. This is at Cheekwood Mansion. Again, I've got all my writing around here. I started doing the date in a box. I got some of the painting done, but not all of it. So I still have room to embellish this later when I have time. This was in Murfreesboro at Canonsburg, and I only did 1 page instead of a double page spread, and only had the opportunity to paint this little vignette right up here in the corner. But I do have room for a couple of more here. I believe that's it for that particular one. So this watercolor kit holds this travel journal, a little bowl for me to put my water in. It holds my watercolor pencils. I always take my business card with me because inevitably when you're out somewhere painting, it'll make people curious and they'll come up to you and ask you about it, and that way you can have your card to give to them. This is my tiny little watercolor kit, which I love. It has a ring here so you can hold it. And it's just got a few pans of watercolor in here. And then you can use this to actually mix your color on. So it's really tiny. I love that. It even has the cheat sheet that I made. If I wanted to, I could paint on watercolor pad that's already been pre-blocked. And you paint on this, and because it's stuck on all 4 sides, it's not gonna curl up or wiggle on you. And then once it's dry, you can take a razor blade and slice off that page. But it's about postcard size, so that's something you can carry with you. Now this is not watercolor, this is gouache. But because the bag's big enough to hold it, I like to take the gouache with me, especially the white gouache. And gouache is a little different than watercolor because it is opaque. It will still reconstitute with water, just like the watercolor, but instead of being transparent, it's got an opaque finish to it, and it's more chromatic. So sometimes you'll want to go back with a little gouache to add a little pop of color. carry that with me. This is the watercolor set that I use in the studio and when I'm out painting. Again, it has that ring there that slips on your finger to help you hold it. And you can see how many different colors come in this set. Now, the sap green is nearly empty, so I can go purchase a sap green and replace that. And it also has magnets in there that help hold the different pans in this set. But I just love this. This is one of my favorites. Here are a couple, I think there's one more. Somewhere there's one more. But this right here is a professional watercolor pen. I've got orange and dioxazine purple. And these, once I take them out of their packaging, can pop into here. So I love that. And then this is the last little thing. Well, not quite the last thing. I've got a white pen, white gel pen, and a black pen that always come in handy. I've got a big tube of gouache in white, which always comes in handy in case you need to fix something that you've messed up. And then this bag is fun because it carries not only my pencils, but also my brushes, pencils, and an array of watercolor pens and more brushes. But the pens are lots of fun because if you're traveling, like let's say you're driving all day to go somewhere and someone else is doing the driving, you can do watercolor in the back seat and not have a bowl of water that you're going to spill. This is watercolor that's already got the water in the pen, and you've got all these different colors, and then you can use just a clean, wet brush to move those colors around, and you can do so much with this. I love these. I highly recommend the watercolor pens. So if you're looking to invest in anything, I would do the pens first, and then the watercolor pens. This happens to be my purse. It's very small. It's a crossbody messenger bag. It also is a man's messenger bag. It's all leather. I just love it. And it's got all these different pockets for different things, but the back pocket is especially helpful because it will hold my travel watercolor kit and another travel journal and a pencil. And this is all you need. Now I love, this is all handmade paper. And this paper feels like leather, but it's actually paper. And then this kit comes apart, so you've got this little built-in well to hold your water, and it will hold its own little brush. So I've had this for years. You can see where it's got little holes in the middle where I've used the color. But everything is complete right here except for water. So if you're on an airplane, you can just ask the flight attendant for just a little cup of water, and then you've got everything you need to keep you busy for as long as you're flying. And I have painted and flown on airplanes several times. It really does pass the time. And it also doesn't really bother anybody. It doesn't smell, it doesn't take up any room. And so I love this. This is actually a Winsor Newton kit. You can get them just about anywhere. They're pretty ubiquitous. They're just everywhere. And then this watercolor journal, let me see, that just happened to be my tea one afternoon. Tulips at Cheekwood, a scene from the balcony on the Isle of Palms, another scene from the balcony at the Isle of Palms. Painted some cherries one day. Painted this on a plane going out to the Denver Art Museum of a moose. I love the deckled edge of the paper. I just think that's beautiful. At the Denver Art Museum, this was last January, they were having the largest exhibit of Monet paintings ever assembled. I forget how many there were, 230 paintings, I think. Might have even been more than that. It was just amazing. And they don't let you paint in the museum, but they let you sketch in the museum. So I took a picture of the painting that I was going to study, and then while I was standing in the museum, I went ahead and sketched in the basic shapes. So that is one thing I love. Most museums and botanical gardens, they may not allow paint on the premises, but they will allow you to sketch. So this is another Monet study. Now this is a Picasso study from the Frist Art Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. This is at Carnton in Franklin, Tennessee. This is a Picasso study from the Frist in Nashville. And then this is a study of an Emile Groupe painting that's on exhibit right now at the Cheekwood Museum. And it's an exhibit of the American Impressionists, so it's pretty amazing. So that's this particular set that I use. And can carry that just about anywhere I want to take it. Now this is something I wanted to show you. It's just a tin. I found it in an antique store. And there's nothing in it. I don't know if it held cigarettes at one time or mints. I have no idea, but it's a vintage tin. But it's just the right size to be a homemade watercolor kit. So if I wanted to buy some more half pans in basic primary colors, I can take them out of here and stick them in here and probably even put a small little brush, watercolor brush, and then be able to just stick that in my pocket. And it's got all kind of style, it'd be homemade, and it's very easy to do. So I'm looking forward to working on that. That's a project I'm working on at the moment. And then this travel watercolor journal, actually I've not done much in it, but the reason why I got it is because the paper is not white. The paper is kind of a craft paper, and I loved the way that looked, so I've only done one page, and of course I've done the outline like I always do, except this time I incorporated my name in that border and illustrated travel journal. So I've incorporated that and then started painting in gouache, because the gouache is opaque, you can see it much, much better. So that's that particular journal. This is interesting. It's Charbon water-soluble pastels. And you may have worked with pastels before on paper, but what I love about the the water-soluble pastels, and look how beautiful their box is. I just love that. I use these colors as if they're watercolor. So all I have to do is have a little thing of water, a little bowl of water, and then a brush. And all I have to do is swipe that wet brush over the pastel and it turns it into watercolor. And they're the most unique, beautiful colors you can imagine. And I had never heard of water-soluble pastels before, but I use these all the time. They're just too pretty not to use. I don't usually travel with these though. These are the ones I usually use in the studio. Okay, so now we have to look for our inspiration, and we do that when we travel. But are you going to be a more abstract painter? Are you going to be a more realistic painter? Are you going to do more cartoon type illustrations or more realistic illustrations? You need to think about what your style is and what you're wanting to do. And one of the best ways to figure that out is by looking and seeing what other people do and what appeals to you. So I'll be right back and show you some books of illustrated books that I collect and different pieces and parts of it that really appeal to me and what I've done to integrate those into my journals. So just to share with you some of my books, I love to collect hand illustrated books, and I've got two examples here of children's books. And one is, I call it Linnea. They probably pronounce it differently in France, but it's Linnea in Monets Garden. And it's a story of Linnea, who's a young girl who goes to Monet's garden, and it's interspersed with actual photos of Monet and his home at Giverny and his garden and his paintings. So I just loved Monet and had to own this for myself. But look how beautiful these illustrations are. And I love that the flower goes off the page and onto another page. I'll probably integrate that into some of my work. But the little cat, I mean, who hasn't had a little cat do their head like that, right up against your leg? So I love this book. And then this one right here is The Complete Adventures of Tom Kitten and His Friends by Beatrix Potter. And again, hand illustrated, beautiful flowers, beautiful little kittens all throughout this book, but completely different than the illustrations in the Monet's book. And see how some of them are just pen and ink? And then others are complete watercolor paintings. Some of them take up the whole page, and then some of them have vignettes throughout the page. So this is by far some of my favorite right here. These are important to me because it was someone's passion when they went to Yosemite to do watercolor studies of everything they saw so they could remember it. So this is actually someone's illustrated travel journal. And they used watercolor. And some of the illustrations are very simple, but they're just beautiful. And I've never been to Yosemite, but I would love to go after seeing this. And so it's not difficult. You can see there's just basic shapes being used, but it clearly conveys where they were. And then of course they wrote up where they were and what they saw. Oh my goodness, that's gorgeous. The waterfall that's there. Trees, pine cones, vignettes, pen and ink drawings, the different leaves. So that was what was important to them. Now this one blows my mind. I cannot believe that this gentleman was so crazy about trout that every trout that he caught, he painted its portrait. And this whole book is nothing but pictures of trout. I didn't even know there was that many different kinds of trout. The Rio San Lorenzo trout, the Rio Yaqui trout, the Gia trout, the Apache trout, the spawning Northern Dolly Varden trout, Northern Dolly Varden trout, Southern Dolly Varden trout. I mean, it's stream bull trout. We're talking, 150 pages of trout illustrations. It's just amazing. There's not a lot of words. He did name them, and he did say where he was when he painted this. But the detail is quite amazing that he would go to that much detail to show the difference between this trout versus the other. And that's what caught my eye on this particular book. These are fun because they are cookbooks, and I love to cook, I love to eat, I love to paint. So this is a little French cookbook, and the cover is illustrated in watercolor, and then there's a few illustrated drawings throughout the cookbook, also in watercolor, which I love. And I have no problem doing a painting of my meal. I think I've shown you that in some of my other journals. This one's called A Sprig of Mint. It's another illustrated recipe book with recipes and then little illustrations and beautiful borders. And Susan Branch is one of my favorite authors, and I probably have 6 of her books. And this is called the Summer Book. There's also the Vineyard Book, the Winter Book, the Autumn Book, the Spring Book, and then one other one that I can't think of the name of it right now, but just she'll take a subject matter and then just illustrate it with these adorable watercolor illustrations. And you can see the beach umbrellas, the flip-flops, the flowers, the watermelon, the ice cream cones. I mean, it's hard not to want to just copy this because it's so beautiful. Got a little butterfly over here. I love the gingham tablecloths, the different roses, the beach chairs, person at the beach with the wind blowing, because you can tell because the ribbon on their hat's blowing. We've got a thermos and a sailboat. But here is her garden, and that just takes me to a whole nother place. You know, it's like I want a garden just like this. And she's got the little bee houses, and she's got hydrangeas as well as vegetables and flowers and herbs. We've got picket fences and birds and straw hats, and it's just so lovely. The whole book is lovely. So if there was any style I would want to emulate, it would be this. Even the handwriting or the font that they used is so beautiful, and just can't get enough of her illustrations. Croquet, a lighthouse, clothes drying on a clothesline, books to read, beach umbrellas, roses on a picket fence, farmer's market, wild blueberries. I mean, the whole thing is just a joy to look at all of these. These two are kind of fun. This one's called Cozy, the British Art of Comfort, and it's hand illustrated. And there's a lot of pen and ink drawings in here on different ways to be cozy at home. Coffee, tea, blankets, fireplace, the hearth, candles. It's just a joy to read, and I love the illustrations of that. This one's fun. This was Mr. Boddington's Etiquette, Charm and Civility for Every Occasion. And again, they're not connected. It's just little icons of things. A pram, a turkey, a gift, pencils, a wine bottle, a typewriter. But it's an illustrated etiquette book with beautiful illustrations throughout. This book right here is by Katie Daisy, and I was not introduced to her until I really got into illustrated journaling, but this woman lives it. This is a field guide to how to be a wildflower, and love this book. One thing that she suggests, and I have taken her up on this, is if you are painting near a stream or near a river or near the ocean, and that is to go collect some of that water and to use that to constitute or reconstitute your watercolors so that you're painting into your painting the ocean. you're painting into your painting the lake that you happen to be sitting next to while you're painting, or the stream or the river. And her books are so beautiful. Lots of flowers, lots of butterflies. This is her house with all these flowers coming out of it. Even her handwriting, her fonts that she creates are painted. There's quotes throughout here. This one happens to be by Henry David Thoreau. She encourages people to have wanderlust. And I love the fact that it's a country lane with barns and fields, but from her perspective, the flower is that big. I mean, it's as big as the clouds. Beautiful deer, tulips, trees, mountain. And this is a quote by John Muir. Lists, I love lists. Magical places to visit. Exploring the redwoods. Marvel at the Blue Ridge Mountains. These are lists of national forests, national seashores. Daydream under the giant sequoias. Hiking the Appalachian Trail. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Look at this lily of the valley. Yeah, I love, love, love her work. So that's something I collect. Love that. This is one that needs to be in every library. Queen Victoria's Sketchbook. I don't know if you watch Victoria on PBS, but I've become fascinated with Queen Victoria. And when I learned that she had a sketchbook, I learned it through that PBS Masterpiece Theater show, because it shows her painting in there at one point, and found the sketchbook. So I've got a copy of it. And you can see the work that she's done, painting her children, painting Rosina. A lot of these are just pen and ink, and then some have watercolor washes. That's her husband and herself, and different people at court. And it just feels very historic that what we're doing as watercolor journalist is, there's just been a history of this, and she's part of that tribe of travel journaling, illustrated travel journaling. This is fun. I discovered this one when I was in Scotland. It's His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. So it's Prince Charles Watercolors of Scotland. Isn't that beautiful? English scenes, different English scenes. And that looks like Windsor Castle right there. Prince Albert's kitchen garden buildings. I'm not familiar with those. Looking towards North Creek. And see how simple that is, but how beautiful it is. You don't have to be, an extraordinary drawer or painter. Just paint what you see, paint what you feel. And, this is pretty extensive. This is Sandringham House. But some of his stuff is very, very simple. Views over Hillington on a January afternoon. Farm buildings in Norfolk. Cottages in the snow at Sandringham. Just a winter scene at Sandringham. And the whole book have different views from the moors, the countryside. This is the reason where I really wanted the book, was of Scotland. This is Balmoral. More views of Balmoral. looking toward the lock. Some of these things I can't pronounce. That's gorgeous. So this is a fun book to own. Now these are all my travel journals. The illustrated books of traveling. This is specifically for traveling. I've got one of New Orleans, Washington, D.C., and Charleston. Again, these are some of my favorites. If I was to emulate any of these books, the Susan Branch ones would be one, and then these three would be the others. But just adorable little pieces of churches, a gateway walk, street vendors, the harbor, fishing, the Gullah people and their customs. That's the one of Charleston. New Orleans, oh, it's just gorgeous. The flowers, the maps, the boats on the Mississippi, restaurants, oysters. There's just no end of what you could illustrate. Washington, D.C., our nation's history, the cherry trees in bloom, the monuments. You can capture all of that. This one right here is called Jane Was Here, and it's an illustrated guide to Jane Austen's England. Beautiful paintings of houses, horses, monuments, maps, plants, books, sparkling rosé, appetizers, again, but it all has to do with Jane Austen. This one's fun. This is another fun. This is by Rae Dunn, and a lot of people know her work from her pottery. But she went to France in the 90s and forgot her camera and decided that she was just going to paint everything she saw. So here she's painting different colors and flavors of macaron. See if I can find it. There's illustrations in here, hors d'oeuvres. And there's one where she painted all the here's her handbags that she had. But she had one of dresses that I just absolutely loved. Here's perfumes from the market, different perfume bottles. Flowers, teapots, antique linens from the flea market. Shoes, sushi, spoons. So again, this is her personal travel journal that she ended up adding photos to later and turning into a book. Here's some fancy teacups. That one's lovely. And then these are just more illustrated travel journals from all over the place. This is from Murray County, Tennessee. The Murray County Historical Society sells this book. It's full of Mildred Hartsfield watercolors. This is the architect of the British country house. I love these. It's illustrations of these humongous houses that are all over Europe actually, but mostly in England and in France. This is the London sketchbook. And then I also have the Venice sketchbook. And these are places that I've not been, but I love that other people have gone, they've done their sketching, they thought enough of them to publish them so people like me can buy these books and live their journeys through them and through their illustrations. And I just can't wait to fill all of my journals and to be at one day know that I can go back and look at those and relive them and remember the joy of being in the moment, the joy of actual painting, and also sharing that joy with friends that I'm traveling with or with family. And it is by far my favorite part of painting. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you for indulging me by looking at the books with me. But they really will help get those wheels turning and help you decide how you want your journal to look. And I'd love to see it. So whenever you finish that, even if it's just one page, be sure and put it on Facebook or social media and tag me in it so I can be sure to see it. And I want you to, above all, just have fun with this. Thanks so much.
So, if you like what you've seen and you want to take part in Brilliant Strokes, don't forget, go online to our Facebook page, that's Spring Hill TN Parks and Recreation, or to the Spring Hill City website and register. Registration opens February 18th, and the first 8 people to register for each class will get a free goodie bag. Can't wait to get creative and have fun.